pretty sure fits the bill for each and every one of us today. There is always something in our lives that can get in the way of what the Lord is wanting to do in our lives. God's got a great plan for you. He's always had a great plan for you. But as we maneuver through His will for our lives, as we make this journey through God's will for our lives, sometimes we have just this one thing that gets in the way. This one constant thing that just comes back over and over again. And this morning from the book of Numbers, chapter 13, I want to share a message entitled, Facing Your Giants. Now, the children of Israel were no stranger to adversaries. The Lord allowed them to have to face many warring nations, and this was mostly because of their inconsistent loyalty to Him. Many times they would drift and would begin to worship other gods, and God would allow them to be taken captive, and they would lose their liberties and their freedoms, and then they would figure out what to do, and they would find their way back to God. But in this particular passage this morning, I want to share with you a message so that we can take from their experience, from the experience of this nation of Israel, how they were able to overcome this one thing that was standing in their way. It was always God's desire for the nation of Israel to find this promised land, this land of Canaan that He promised to them as a land exclusively for them. And you know the story. It took them a long time to get there. And finally and eventually they would get there. But we find ourselves this morning looking in Numbers chapter 13, beginning with verse 1. This entire story covers verses 1 through 33, but we'll jump around just a little bit. Numbers 13, beginning in verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel from each tribe of their fathers. You shall send a man, every one a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. These are the names of the men who Moses sent to spy out the land. The previous verses would have named all of these 12 individuals that were chosen. Verse 17, Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, Go up this way into the south and go up to the mountains and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruits of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land of the wilderness of Zin as far as Rahab, near the entrance of Hamath. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zon in Egypt. Then they went and came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. The place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down there. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told them and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there, and the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out. The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sights. Here, the nation of Israel, they are literally on the brink of this land of promise. They are there. They have finally made it to this place that God had promised them to be theirs. Now, how do we know that the nation of Israel were really Baptists? Is they had to form a committee before they went in to look around. And Moses did that. And I don't mean that. I'm just joking with you. But Moses said, I want one man, an influential man from each tribe. So 12 men were selected to go in and spy out this land. And so they went in and they looked around, and Moses said, come back and tell us what it looks like. Tell us how the vegetation is. Tell us all that you can tell us about it, and bring some of the fruit of the land back. And so these men went in and they spied around and they came back. And 10 of them, the Bible tells us, 10 of these 12 men, with the exception of 2, Joshua and Caleb, 10 of the men came back and said, we have no business to go in there. We don't need to go in there. The city is fortified with great walls, and there are giants in the land. Giants, men of great size. The Bible tells us that descendants of the tribe of Anak were present there. Can you think of one person in the Bible that is well known for being a man of great size? That would have been Goliath, who was believed to have been over 9 feet tall. Goliath descended from the tribe of Anak. So they came back and they said, yes, the land is great, the vegetation is great. They brought back a cluster of grapes that was so big that 2 men had to carry it on a pole. That tells you how great the vegetation was. So they came back, and the story was wonderful, and it's great, and all this stuff is so great. However, we shouldn't go in. We better not go in, because there's giants in the land and they'll devour us. Now, what happens here? The long story short is they don't go into the land of promise at that time. And God allows them to wander 40 years while they try to figure it out. So what we want to do today for ourselves, for our benefit, is to take from this story some truths that will help you and help me the next time that we find ourselves facing whatever challenge it is that gets in our way. As we're trying to find God's will for our lives. What is it, that one thing that just comes around and always stands in between you and the will that God has for your life? What gets in my way? What stands in front of me? What intimidates me and causes me to be fearful? I want us to consider just a few truths this morning from this story and find out, first of all, the children of Israel lost the land of promise because of who they feared. They lost the land of promise because of who they feared. In verse 27, then they told them and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless. Other translations of the Bible just use the word but there. But. How many times do we do that? When we're talking with the Lord and we're praying and we say, Lord, I get it. Everything you're saying is true, and it's right, and you make sense, and this all makes sense to me. But, and then we give our excuse. We come up with our reason why we won't take that next step, why we won't do that next thing. And the nation of Israel is no different. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large, and moreover, the descendants of the tribe of Anak are there. And the Amalekites dwell in the land to the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea, and all along the banks of the Jordan. All these reasons why they didn't want to go. All these intimidating things. All these things that made them fearful. In verse 33, there we saw the giants. So they laid their eyes on these men of great size, and they became fearful. And how many times do we see something that reminds us? We hear something that reminds us. And that one thing that gets in our way. That thing, that problem, that issue, and sometimes that person that gets in our way. How many times does that remind us of what happened? There we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. They were intimidated. They were afraid. And 10 of those 12 spies came back and said, we cannot go in there, will be destroyed. God has led us to this point to have us to be destroyed, and that couldn't be any farther from the truth. Only 2 of those 12 said, yes, we should do this thing. God has brought us through so much. We should do this. We see that they had a lot of reasons to be fearful. There were actually, in the land of promise, 7 enemy nations that they had already messed around with. They had already confronted. They had already had issues with. There were the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And all along this journey, they've already had conflict with these people. So they were familiar with these enemies. And that's all that they saw were the enemies that were there. And 10 came back. And that voice of the 10 was louder than the voice of the 2 that said we should take the land. And the children of Israel believed what the Bible called the evil report. And they decided not to take the land promised. We are not supposed to be fearful. Now, it's a natural thing to be afraid. If you've ever been afraid, that doesn't make you an unusual person. That makes you a normal person. To have moments where we experience fear. But the Bible tells us that we're not to live in that. We're not to let that emotion control us. And where do we find this? 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7 reminds us this. For God has not given us a spirit of what? A spirit of fear. But of power and of love and of sound mind. The Bible tells us right there, God did not equip us. We're not wired to live in fear because His power is so great. His ability is so much greater than our own. We are not to be afraid. The children of Israel were to take that land that day. It was for them, and we'll see the reason why in just a moment. Fear is a natural human reaction. It's normal for us to feel afraid. But it's not all right for that fear to take over your life and call the shots in your life. When you serve a God today that is all-powerful, all-present, and almighty, and can do all things. They lost the land of promise because of who they feared. President and Mrs. Benjamin Harrison were so intimidated by the newfangled electricity in the White House that they wouldn't dare touch any of the light switches. If there were no servants around to turn off the lights when the Harrisons went to bed, they slept with all the lights on. They're afraid. There's no reason for us to be afraid and to live in fear. The children of Israel lost the land of promise because of who they feared. Secondly, they lost the land of promise because of who they followed. Because first of all, who they feared. Secondly, because of who they followed. In verses 27 through 33, these men, these spies come back and they give this report. And it's a great report, right up to the point to where they jump in there. And in verse 32, and they gave the children of Israel a bad report. Other translations of the Bible call it an evil report. They gave an evil report. Evil meaning it was contrary to God's will for them. It was the wrong report, and they listened to it, and they followed these 10. When these 2 men, very, very close to Moses, Joshua and Caleb, their voice wasn't loud enough to overtake the 10 that gave the evil report. And the children of Israel followed that 10. Now, how often are we guilty of the same thing? Before we're too hard on them, how often do we do the same thing? When a group of people feel a certain way, it's kind of easy for us to just sort of drift in the direction of the majority. Sometimes when we hear the same message over and over, it's easy for us to just kind of slide over and listen to that majority message. Sometimes the hardest thing for us to believe is the message that only one person is hearing and sharing, or the message that only we have. Sometimes that's the hardest lesson and the hardest message because we don't have a group of people standing around agreeing with us. Joshua and Caleb knew the will of God, but they followed the majority simply because 10 was more than 2. They lost the land of promise because of who they feared, who they followed, Thirdly, they lost the land of promise because of who they forgot. They lost the land of promise because of who they feared. They feared something which in a moment you're going to find out they had no reason to be afraid of. Secondly, they lost the land of promise because of who they followed. They did not listen to the two men who were as close to Moses as anyone could be and would have understood the journey and the significance of being right there on the border of the land of promise and not taking it. But thirdly, they lost it because of who they forgot. Their journey had been a long one. And they had been in a lot of places and traveled a lot of time and spent a lot of time lost and a lot of time in captivity and a lot of time in the opposite direction of what God wanted for them. But it wasn't without proof that God was with them every step of the way. Let me give you a few examples. This should have been enough for the children of Israel to listen to that report and tell those 10 guys, listen, you are wrong. God has been with us since the beginning. Here's a few examples. Number one, they never got sick. They never got sick. Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 15. And the Lord will take away from you all sickness, and will afflict you with none of the terrible diseases of Egypt which you have known, but will lay them on all those who hate you. They never got sick. Secondly, they never needed new shoes. Now, once in a while, as we get to know each other, I'll tell on Karen every once in a while. Karen has more shoes than Carter's has pills. I'm telling you. We've got this thing in our bedroom. It looks like the little cubby holes that you had in kindergarten. Remember those? In kindergarten, that's where you kept your stuff and your gym shoes and your pencil box and all your stuff. And your mat, because you could take a nap. Oh, I would have loved if that nap taking thing would have lasted all through school. That would have been great. But you put your little mat in there, your pencil box, and we have this thing at home that looks like that, except it is dedicated for one purpose and one person, only one purpose, and that is for her shoes. They never ran out of shoes, so they didn't need lots of shoes. Deuteronomy 33 and verse 25, your sandals shall be as iron and bronze. Number 3, their clothes never wore out. Deuteronomy 29:5, and I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you, and your sandals have not worn out on your feet. No one ate bread, but they lived well. Bread was an everyday, sometimes an every meal thing. Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse 6. You have not eaten bread, nor have you drunk wine or similar drink, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. No one ate bread, yet they lived well. Number 5, no one drank wine. Wine would have been a very staple item in many of their meals. Deuteronomy 29:6. Nor have you had wine or similar drink. Every need was met along the way. The Bible even tells us even more. Those times where they didn't know where they were going. God provided a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And as long as they would follow the cloud and follow the fire, they knew where to go. God was with them all the way, and God is with you all the way every day. God is with you. It may not seem like it. It may not always feel like it. But God has not checked out. He's not left you alone. And the children of Israel should have realized that God was doing miraculous things to get them to this point. So why couldn't they believe Him just one more time? Because of who they forgot. Every need was met. So how did they get the land of promise back? This isn't a very good story if we just ended it here. How did they get it back? Now remember, like I told you, they didn't go in this first time. And God allowed them to wander for 40 years. Now, if you would get your biblical maps out, the irony in their being lost was they wandered not very far from where they should have been. That's the irony in what happened. They were just lost. They weren't far away. They just weren't where they were supposed to be. And when we're not obedient to the Lord, there's many times where He just lets us wander. Not far from where we're supposed to be. Just far enough to know that we're lost. And to know that we're out of His will for the moment. Here's how they got the land of promise back. Number 1, they got a new commander for the old commander. At some point, Moses steps down. He's no longer leading them. Joshua rises up and persuades the people to listen to God and have faith in Him. They got a new commander for an old command. Secondly, they got a new courage for an old conflict. That old conflict, that nagging lack of faith that they showed 40 years previously, they had to overcome that, and you and I have to do the same. That conflict that allows us to become fearful and to run and to have a lack of faith in God, we've got to overcome that. We have to beat that. We've got to overcome whatever it is that allows us to be so fearful. They got a new courage for an old conflict, because one day they will come back and we'll go back to the land of promise and they will go in. And thirdly, they got a new commitment from the old crowd. And that was important. You see, in those 40 years that they wandered, an entire generation of men perished in that 40 years. An entire generation of men would not see the land of promise. But they got a new commitment from who was left. A new commitment from the old crowd. There's one part of the story that I really never noticed until just a couple of years ago. Remember this verse that we read earlier? Verse 28, nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. It got me thinking, why do giants and enemies who despise God and intimidate everyone and make everyone afraid because they're men of great size, why do they need to hide behind big, thick, high walls? And if you're a giant, if you're the biggest thing around, you don't need to hide from anybody. Why would these giants need to live in these fortified cities with these high, thick walls? In Joshua chapter 2, because we go from reading about this account, first of all, in Deuteronomy, and then there's a lot of biblical history that takes place between the first time they were at the land of promise and the time they actually take it. But in Joshua chapter 2, Joshua sends some spies back into the land of Canaan a second time. And a harlot named Rahab hides these spies in her home, and she provides safe hiding for them. And this is the conversation that she has with the spies. Don't miss this. Now, before they laid down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. Are you hearing what I'm saying? This lady who lives in this land of Canaan, who lives among these giants, these men of great size, she's telling these spies, we've heard what the Lord has done for you. The terror of you has fallen on us all. What's that mean? That means we've heard what God has done, and it frightens us. Verse 10, for we heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, whom you utterly destroyed. Verse 11, don't miss this. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted, and neither did there remain any courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Why did the Israelites see those giants living in those fortified cities? Because the giants were afraid of them. So today, if you do nothing else, whatever it is that's getting in your way, whatever happened in your past that you just can't seem to shake, that you won't let go of, that you just keep replaying over and over, whatever that is, you need to remind yourself today, and the Bible supports us in this. Our adversary, the devil, the Bible says that even his demons believe and tremble. So you need to look at that giant. You need to look at whatever it is standing in your way today and remind yourself that it really is afraid of you. stop reminding yourself of what has happened. Stop reminding yourself of that moment where you made that bad judgment and you seemed to fail the Lord. Stop reminding yourself of that. Because that's all the adversary has. That's all he's got on you, is how much you're willing to remember and how much you're willing to drag up. You see, we're not wired to be able to forget things very well. Let's just imagine next Sunday Richard Cooper comes in here and he's got a beautiful, beautiful yellow leisure suit on. Some of you guys, I'm old enough to remember leisure suits. I'm that old. Some of you guys that want to sit here and act like you never wore one. You did. You had one. And I had the silky shirts with the big collar, and there was a time where that was very stylish. But let's just say Richard decides he's going to wear one next Sunday. And he comes in here and that thing's bright yellow, canary yellow. And it's got the white stitching and the fancy, colorful shirt. And as he walks in, everybody. Miss Nelda comes up to him and says, "That's a beautiful suit, Richard. You look so good." And Connie says, "Richard, you never look so good. You never look so handsome in your life." And all of you come up to him and you just say, "That's beautiful. I love that suit. That's so beautiful." Until he gets to Karen. And Karen looks at him and says, "Richard, you look ridiculous." Is that the best you could come up with? Are there no full-length mirrors in your house? Let's move forward a minute. The next time Richard goes to the closet and he's sifting through the things to wear on Sunday, and he gets to that yellow leisure suit, how likely is it that he's going to remember all those nice things that you said? But how likely is it that he's going to remember the one that was negative? That's how we think. That's the way we're wired. We don't remember a lot of the good things, but boy, we sure hang on to the bad stuff. Don't do that. Face your giant this morning and remind him that at the end of the day, it's afraid of you. Would you pray with me as we prepare for a time of decision? Father, we have had an opportunity to read from your word, a unique story, an interesting story. And Father, we know today that it's your desire for us to live in victory. And it's your desire for us to have victory over whatever it is that's getting in our way. And sometimes we're just going to have to simply just stand there and look that thing right in the eye and remind our adversary that greater is he that is within us than he that is within the world, and that we're going to be victorious and that we have nothing to fear. As long as we're following you. Father, just remind us today that you desire to do a great work in our lives. And as long as we're still here, you're not finished. Help us to have that faith in you and that trust in you that we need to have. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.